Okay, so here I have my second string quartet that I'm writing for the Callisto Quartet. So what I like to do is compose with paper right in front of me, and then I have paper right here next to me on the piano, and then I have my Sibelius score in front of me, and then I have the Piano Tech piano BST right here. So I can play a bunch of notes here and it sounds great. So it's kind of like my little mouse over here. And then I have my actual mouse over here. Alright, so you just saw a couple clips of me actually composing the piece back in my apartment in New York. Right now I'm in Los Angeles just filming this video to show to the audiences at the Caramore Festival, just to give you a bit of more of a background about how this piece came about, what are some of the musical elements in the piece, and just some of my influences of how the piece came to be about. But the first thing I want to answer is, how did the piece materialize in the first place? Back in 2019, I decided to go to this audition where a bunch of different artists came in from all over the world to try to vie for a spot on this roster. One of these groups was named the Callisto String Quartet, who at the time was based at Rice University, and now they're based in Yale. They played this piece by Ligeti, the String Quartet #1. So I came up to Paul, one of their violinists, and I said, you know, Paul, I'm a composer. I have written a string quartet before. If you want to check it out one of these days and let me know what you think, it would be great to collaborate in some way down the line. It was barely maybe a 5-minute conversation. You know, they had to go off and do their next thing. I remember getting home. It was either getting home that night or literally the next morning. It was very fast, probably within 24 to 48 hours, where I got an email back from the Callisto Quartet telling me that they really enjoyed my music and they wanted to find a way to commission me as soon as possible. And little did I know that they already had this opportunity with the Caramore Festival to have a new string quartet premiered by that group. And I thought to myself, you know, this has got to be the fastest commission I've ever received. All the stars pretty much aligned all at the same time and very quickly. I felt that it was just about time for me to have my second foray into writing for the string quartet. So there are two kind of origins of this piece. #1 is when I was introduced to this Italian composer theorist from the 16th century named Nicola Vicentino, who was really into writing these very complicated microtonal choral pieces, where he would start, for example, in this particular piece, Musica Crispa Caput, he would start with a section of completely diatonic music. Then in the second section, he would have completely chromatic music. And then the last section, he would have this quartertone music where he would use not just the pitches of the piano, but the notes in between. I was introduced to this music by my professor at Columbia University, Jörg Federikas, and I was just blown away by how he was able to incorporate not just the microtonality aspect, these notes that are in between the white and the black keys, but also how he was able to keep the triadic foundational principles of Western harmony. And that always stayed with me in these last 4 or 5 years during my time as a graduate student at Columbia University. And the kind of two-part story to this origin story is marrying my wife, who's Italian. And in all of 2020, I put myself in the books and also talking to a lot of different Italian people, trying to just immerse myself in the language. Basically, by the end of it, I was able to take like an Italian test and pass it. So Italian was on my mind. I decided, okay, what can I do with all these influences that are happening to me at the present moment, and how could I make them relevant in my composing? I feel that as an artist, you have to take what's happening to you in real time into your work. Otherwise, it's kind of like you're not really expressing what's happening to you at that moment. When you're an artist especially, you want to look back and say, oh, okay, in 2015 I did this, or 2016 I did this. It's almost kind of like a scrapbook. I took this piece by Vicentino, Musica Crispa Caput, and I saw that it had these 3 amazing sections. The first section is completely diatonic. It only uses 7 notes. And then the second section is chromatic. It uses all 12 notes. But then the third section introduces these notes that are in between the white and black keys, which gave it a really kind of eerie flavor, but at the same time, you could still tell that it was all part of the same piece. So my idea was, what if Nicola Vicentino also knew about the Arabic maqamat, which are these scales that are very much like our Western scales, but there are only a few notes that are detuned down to create a roadmap for where you are in the world. Probably the best way I can describe it. I actually took these 3 sections, I analyzed all the harmonies, and I decided to use it as a literal roadmap for my piece. So I'll give you a few examples of this. In the first little bit I'm going to show you, the Callisto Quartet is rehearsing the first 4 bars of the piece, which just introduces this high G, which encapsulates the beginning of the Vicentino piece. So the Vicentino piece I'm talking about just starts out with a drone. So I decided, okay, let me do the same thing, but I'll put it up really high in the violins, and I'll also introduce some of these ornamental figures that are very common in Arabic music, and also start introducing the microtonal elements in these figures. So take a listen to this and you'll see how this is kind of like an ornamentation addition to what a Renaissance composer would do. And here is the original version of that part of the piece. This next excerpt we're going to demonstrate is this amazing array of chords that Vicentino presents in the first section of his piece, where he would have all these chords in root position and they feel very grounded. And I thought, how could I express the same thing but actually have more of a light kind of feeling, kind of be more in the clouds, and at the same time have a little bit of those ornamental figures and microtonal gestures from the Arabic music, but not so in your face as it would be later on in the piece. And here is my rendition of those chords, played by the Callisto Quartet. So in the second section of this Vicentino piece, you can see that he's using more chromatic notes to give more flavor to what he's doing in these chord progressions. Now in this section, I took a completely different approach. So instead of having these static chords that are playing one after the other, I decided, okay, what if I took the tremolando effect, which is basically going back and forth on the violin, and what if I had these microtones from the Arabic scale introduced instead of the chromatic notes, which are almost out of tune in the harmonic landscape of Western music. It sounds very different from the first section, a lot more energy, also signals that we are in a new section of the piece. And now in this third section, Vicentino introduces those notes in between the white and the black keys. And now it's starting to become a very transcendental experience, at least in my view, because you had all these diatonic chords being played. Even when there were chromatic notes, you'd still have diatonic chords underneath these melodic chromatic notes, and it would still sound like you're listening to a typical Western piece of classical music. But once you get to this third section, all the rules pretty much go out the window. If you have, like, for example, a 5-1 cadence where you have C major going to F major, Vicentino just doesn't do that. Instead, he takes the C major chord and raises each of the pitches of that chord up a quarter tone into F major. You still get this 5-1 cadence feel, but that first chord, it feels just a little off. You get this sensation that, okay, I am in 5-1 land, there is some sort of resolution, but not really, and I wanted to depict this in my third section of the piece. So let's listen to a little bit of the Vicentino piece. So when I get into this third section of the piece, instead of using chords like I have been doing most of the piece, I actually introduce a brand new melody which has these microtonal elements that overlap between the vicentino and typical Arabic maqamat. You get this feeling that, okay, hopefully that we have earned this melody that we get in the third section. And then at the end of the piece, we get the chords and the melody one after the other. Here's an example of the melody that encapsulates the entire piece and then a chord that comes right after that. So to me, this replicates the idea of having that C major chord that's up a quarter tone that goes into the F major 5/1 cadence. To me, that's what this bit sounds like.